and save. All right, that's another stream edited down. Man, I've been on a roll lately with all this editing stuff. I don't know, I just got a lot more creative drive lately. I wonder if I could, like, put some of that energy into something a little more serious. Like a full-on game discussion video or something. Man, if only I had a series like that. Wait. Oh, crap, a bit of Bytes, that's right! Oh, God, how long ago was the last video? Oh, good Lord! Hey, welcome back to a bit of Bytes! Totally wasn't a 5-year gap between episodes, and I am totally not gonna put it off for another 5 years. No, sir! Hey, get out of here! Don't you go reminding me of my procrastination! And what's with the old background? We got the newer, fancy, schmancy background available? Better. Anyways, moving on. I've wanted to do this top 5 list for a while, but I've only just recently convinced myself to put it together. I've seen the trend, news articles, and online shows been following lately, what with all the top 10 whatevers and wherevers lists, and I worry a little too much about accidentally coming off as a clickbait whore. I don't know why. I mean, I've never come off that way before, right? But hey, whatever. Let's just put those fears aside and focus on making stuff. For the longest time, I've had a profound respect for video game music composers. It takes a great amount of talent to create memorable melody lines that perfectly frame a video game experience, creating iconic, instantly recognizable scores, writing melodies that won't make you rip your ears off after hearing it loop for the 537th time, and composing around everything the player will be doing. Fortunately, there exists some skillful folk out there writing this stuff every day, capturing the highs, the lows, making it all fit together to amplify what would be just a decent game into a masterpiece worthy of preserving for all time. From these soundtracks, there stems a culture around remixing, rearranging, and covering these tunes. There's a smorgasbord of artists out there doing these remixes, adapting what they know about music into the tracks they love. Some even release full-on albums of remixed music. And that's what I'm covering today, the video game remix albums that I've enjoyed listening to over and over and over and over and over again. I've got a few ground rules for this list before we begin. First off, the original composers and game developers cannot have any direct hand in these remixes. We're mainly focusing on the remixing artists for this list. The original developers and composers can give a thumbs up or endorse an album, but only after it's been released. Second, only one spot on this list per franchise and artist. If I don't do that, I open up the possibility of just throwing a bunch of Zelda on this list, or a single artist multiple times. Third, this list is based on these albums as a whole. While I'll be highlighting some personal favorite tracks, I'm making my decisions based on how much I got out of the entire album. I've had plenty of albums where one track sold me, but one track I really like does not equal a good album overall. Also, and this isn't a ground rule or anything, just something I think should be mentioned, it's important to remember that music is a very subjective thing. There's just no way around it. I will definitely be biased about the choices on this list, due to the games I grew up with, games I enjoy playing today, and the type of music I listen to in general. So my list likely won't line up with your favorites. Now, if you've got a personal favorite remix or cover album, or heck, just a favorite game, remix, or cover song that's not on this list, I encourage you to leave it in the comments below with your favorites and why you love to listen to them. Alright, so with that out of the way, let's get to the list. These are my top 5 video game cover albums. Number 5. Banjo-Kazooie Symphony, the Blake Robinson Synthetic Orchestra. I've mentioned before that Banjo is one of my favorite childhood games. I mean, I think that's obvious, what with the full stream, the mountains of merchandise, and Freeze Easy topping the last top 5 list. Spoilers. So, yeah, I hold this game very close to my heart. The music was always a big sticking point for me. Fun, bouncy, spooky, mysterious, adventurous, and bombastic, all wrapped up in a tight package. Blake Robinson does a remarkable job with his renditions. The goal of this album was to recreate the entire game's soundtrack with something more organic. tossing aside the old N64 MIDI with a much more natural sounding selection of orchestral samples. And it's done to great effect. Like most of the albums that you're gonna see on this list, each song on this album plays its iconic melody multiple times, but the instruments and overall atmosphere of the melody changes up over the course of the song. To positive effect, it feels more like an extension of the melody as opposed to arbitrary repetition. Starting out with the original melody. Slow it down a bit with an emphasis on tuba. Bring up that chorus. And end it with a strong finish. Again, each track has its own little touches to make it stand out from the original. My favorite track on this album would have to be Gruntilda's Lair. It's not overly changed from the original, but the small changes that are there add a great blanket of atmosphere. The use of the opening xylophone as a quiet build-up. The male chorus singing along to the tune. And just the overall addition of more horns and wind instruments. It all does a great job of intensifying that spooky vibe that the original created. There's actually an extra track on this album called Gruntilda's Medley. It's basically Gruntilda's Lair again, but orchestrated to change to the alternate versions of the song that you hear throughout the game. You know, like outside the world entrances. And it's good, but overall I'd stick with Gruntilda's Lair. It sticks around just long enough, and emanates the feel of those first steps into the witch's domain. A negative I have is that for all the intricacies of Blake Robinson's music, it is an entire loud orchestra album comprised of 30 tracks. To say it can get grating is an understatement. It varies up, but I guess constant bombastic orchestra gets to me over time. I think it's the variety of themes that ultimately saves it. It kept the ideas fresh and enabled Blake to create a great rendition of a great soundtrack. Number 4. Hero of Time, Materia Collective. Synthetic's all fine and good, but to get the full orchestra experience, you need a real full orchestra. And that's exactly what you get with Hero of Time, a fully orchestrated, recomposed album of the iconic themes from The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. This album was a Kickstarter project that began on September 30th, 2016, and was successfully funded on October 31st, 2016, with a grand total raised of $51,963, just barely breaking their asking price of $50,000. The album was released on March 27th, 2017, thus managing to make their estimated delivery date of March 2017. The head of the project was Eric Bushels, who's done quite a bit of work in orchestra covers in the past, such as being one of the people behind Zelda Reorchestrated, a project that was dedicated to, and this is going to sound far-fetched, but follow me here, reorchestrating Zelda music. Who knew? Well, he's taking another stab at covering Zelda, this time with a tiny twist to it. A lot of the music I listened to on Zelda Reorchestrated tended not to stray too far from the music's roots. I mean, after all, the goal was to remake, not revise. Hero of Time has some similar roots itself, but the album is laid out more like a musical storybook. It adds atmospheric orchestra ambience in between the very well-known melodies and flows the tracks together in a way that makes listening to the album feel like having the Ocarina of Time story read to you. My favorite track on this album goes to Castletown Market. Fun fact, this track and the track Spirit of the Valley were tied for a very long time while I was making this list, but after some time and some re-listens, I decided Castletown Market edges it out, mainly due to me being a sucker for an uplifting, feel-good orchestra sweep. But seriously, listen to that! lighthearted and epic. It reminds me of the bell music number in Beauty and the Beast. It brings so much excitement into just running around and chatting with the locals. For negatives, well, the whole bombastic thing isn't an issue here. It's got a good mix of quiet parts and loud parts. I think for me, it would be the lack of tracks that I would like to hear on their own. I know I said I'm not focusing heavily on the value of single tracks, but it is still factoring into my overall rating. And to me, this album is really at its best when you do a full listening of it. But with a runtime of almost an hour and 15 minutes, you're gonna need to set a little time aside. But hey, there's plenty of things to do out there that could use a good soundtrack. Pop this on and let Hero of Time take you away to the land of Hyrule. Number 3.
Objection!
Cadenza, Gyakuten Saiban 1, Magical Trick Society. It took me quite a long time before I got around to playing the first Ace Attorney game. I heard so much about it through pop culture buzz, and I knew it was something that I was interested in, but I don't know, I guess there was a really interesting looking squirrel outside that kept me distracted for years. But when I finally got around to playing it, it did not disappoint. I loved the story, the characters, the off-the-wall puzzles and logic, and the one thing that especially grabbed my attention was the soundtrack. So, you can imagine my excitement when I hear that there's an arrangement album of Ace Attorney music that was made in Japan. Specifically, the arrangements were done by Waterman, directed by Gunzi, and published by Magical Trick Society. I didn't find much else about these three entities while researching, aside from all of them working with the indie music scene, which, duh. I found Gunzi's Twitter, that hasn't been updated since 2014, and it's all in Japanese. This is a 12-track album that contains covers of the notable music from the first Phoenix Wright game. Best way I can describe this. Imagine the original composer had full MIDI instruments instead of GBA synths, and also had some time to add some major non-looping elements to all of the songs. That's a good descriptor of Cadenza. Most of the music sounds like it could be played right alongside the original game, but it has plenty of unique solos and breakdowns sprinkled in to add some extra flavor to the mix. Cadenza ranges in a few different styles. Some tracks incorporate electronic synth-style beats. This is best heard in the track Investigation, Core 2001, where it's mostly electronic. Other tracks emphasize more traditional-sounding samples. For example, the track The Steel Samurai is a faithful recreation of the Steel Samurai theme song, and it is as far away from chiptune and synth as this album gets. And then there are songs in between that find a good mix between tones and instruments. My favorite track on this album goes to Examination Allegro. This is the cover of the Testimony theme that you hear when you're on the final stretch of cornering your opponent. Every time I listen to this track, it reminds me of movies in the 80s. Like, this could work as good music during a Rocky-style training montage. Running fast, buffing up, punching hard, eating eggs, I don't know. It's a good pump-up anthem. It really is something you could work out to. It's got the tempo, the beat, and the drive to push forward. The biggest negative I have for Cadenza is the severe lack of buying options for it. I haven't been able to find any legit places to purchase and download this album in the US, and the only ways to listen to this album are finding a random download link for it somewhere, or listening to the tracks on YouTube. Maybe rip them from YouTube? Well, no, because then you have to put up with the compression that YouTube puts on every upload. If there was a safe way to purchase this album, I'd buy it in a heartbeat. As it stands, there's not a whole lot you can do to get it. At least not in the US. I'm not 100% on whether it's easier in Japan. And as for getting your hands on the physical CD... yeah, no. From what I found, it looks like this album was only released physically once during Comiket in 2006. And I'm gonna wager a guess and say there was probably limited supply, so I'd say you're better off just finding the download for it somewhere. Number 2. Determination, Richard E.B. and Ace Waters. So, Undertale's had a bit of a resurgence lately, what with Toby Fox dropping the first chapter of Deltarune on Halloween out of nowhere. It's been a breath of fresh air for me, that's for sure. It also gives me a great chance to take a moment to remember how fun it was to play Undertale for the first time. Undertale was an amazing journey of laughs, adventure, discovery, and understanding. It's another game on my list of games that show what video games can do. Or in short, oh god, I need to put some vowels in there. It's a unique look at how we approach playing games and jabs at video game tropes in just the right satirical way. The soundtrack for Undertale was definitely crafted with care and passion. It has memorable melody lines that you won't forget anytime soon. And with the popularity of Undertale, came the folks inspired to create from it. And I think the remixes and covers made by the fans are some of the best pieces of music I've heard in a long time. That's where Richard B. and Ace Waters come in. They'd both been doing video game covers for quite a while. Heck, I was following Richard B. a while before Undertale came out. Yeah, I know, chalk up them useless hipster points. Both of them began making Undertale covers on their respective YouTube channels. After some time of doing this, the two of them agreed to come together and create this album out of all the songs they made. They cleaned them up a bit, remixed a few parts here and there, and released Determination as a 2-disc, 24-track album. Richard's CD incorporates his usual metal-style guitar covers. The bulk of the songs he covers are the boss fights and the main enemy encounters, which carry themselves well when done in metal. Ace Waters' CD covers a lot of the overworld-type music, using a mix between acoustic instruments and keyboard synth. Both of their styles are radically different from each other and make for a good mix between intense listening and relaxed listening. A track for your every mood. Now, I was planning on just giving one favorite track for each of these albums I'm covering on this list. However, in this case, since this was a joint project between two people, and since Richard and Ace provide such different content on their respective CDs, I'm gonna give one favorite to each of them. For Richard B., my favorite track on this album is Catharsis, Richard's cover of Hopes and Dreams and Save the World. This is one of the best covers I have heard of this song. Taking the fight theme for Azrael Dreamer and adding some extra metal edge to it. The original did have a bit of a rock tinge to it, but it was more of a hybrid between rock, orchestra, and chiptune. Catharsis is completely rock at its core, converting the entire melody line to an amazing guitar-headed marathon. I always imagined that the Save the World theme would sound amazing being performed live on a rock stage somewhere. And thanks to this cover, imagining it is so much easier. For Ace Waters, my favorite track on this album is Such a Friendly Town, featuring Thunderscott. You know what comes to mind when I hear this tune? Winter traditions. You know, a cold, snowy day, warmed up by the smell of hot cocoa, snowball fights, sledding, a fireplace crackling in the living room, a sense of whimsical holiday fun. I mean, all that should make sense considering this is a cover of the theme for Snowed in Town. But every single element in this song enforces these things. It creates a vivid picture of Snowed In and a feel of pride in being there, despite it being a tiny, insignificant village in the middle of the freezing caves. Regardless, putting this track on never fails to immediately brighten up my mood. For negatives, I'm having a hard time coming up with any. I don't know, there's like 3 different versions of Exception on here. One done with guitar, one done with kazoo, and one in a combination of both. And they all come up in rotation if you're listening to the album without doctoring those tracks out. I mean, even then, those are bonus tracks that aren't included in the main 24, so that's not much of an issue. Honestly, I can't come up with a big negative. Richard and Ace put a lot of time, thought, and heart into the tracks on this album. And even if I could think of something, it doesn't negate the overall quality of the end product. Number 1. Surprise. Oh wow, what is this? Cave Story making it to one of BitBe's top 5 lists, and also making it to number 1. How out of left field. It is the upset of the decade, folks. No. If you've known me for a while, you quickly learn that Cave Story is probably my favorite game of all time. And a huge part of my love comes from this game's soundtrack. It's still hard to believe that not only was one man the creator of the visuals, the characters, the story, and the game mechanics, but he also composed all the music tracks for this game too. There's a wide variety of tracks sprinkled throughout this entire game, over 30 different songs. And we're not talking about reusing the same melodies over and over again, but rearranging them to make them sound different, or as I like to annoyingly call it, deja music. Nope, almost all tracks in Cave Story use their own unique melodies. That's pretty impressive. What's even more impressive is when people take it upon themselves to attempt to cover the entire Cave Story soundtrack. And this has been done many times, and me being uber obsessed, I've listened to a lot of them. So, while Cave Story was always gonna hit number 1 on this list, the real question is, which cover album would I say tops them all? This here tops my top 5 hands down. Before this album, I don't think I've heard Cave Story music covered quite this faithfully, but at the exact same time, this creatively. Each track has been given a musical facelift, adding a whole slew of new synths, instruments, and melodies, but overall, the tracks hold the same spirit and energy as the originals. It breathes an ocean of new life into a soundtrack that I already thought was amazing. You in the mood for a specific style? This album has many. Chill out with a little gestation. Maybe something with more upbeat energy, like Mimiga Town. Perhaps something a bit moody, like Moonsong. Heck, let's just shake some glow sticks to Grass Town! Much of these covers are the loud, heavy beat stuff, by the way, but I have popped this on for any number of moods I've been in. And therein lies the biggest issue of this video. What's my favorite track of them all? God, I don't know. It's like you want me to pick out of a line my favorite child or something. You don't want to pick because you love them all in a certain way. Admittedly, there is that one that tends to be a little bastard, but yeah, it's pretty painful. Okay, I've thought long and hard about this. And out of every track on this album, I'd have to go with the one that's my favorite on the original album, Mischievous Robot. There's something that I've noticed about a lot of covers for Mischievous Robot. They tend to not bring the heat! I've heard so many covers of this track that don't feel quite energetic enough. When I played Cave Story my first time through, it felt like such a rush to finally be let off the leash and into the first open area full of baddies to kill. And usually, this is the place you finally gather enough crystals to max out the Polar Star for the first time. And once that happens, the true game begins as you blast your way across the level. This version of Mischievous Robot captures that excitement. The feeling of a tech-covered egg corridor being torn asunder by a flurry of star bullets! I noticed that DM Dokuro's Mischievous Robot incorporates elements from a couple different versions of it. It seems to get its bleepity-bloopityness, bass chiptune, and tempo from the original Organia version, but there's also a part of the song that sounds closer to the mix that you hear in the Cave Story Plus remake. And I do like the melody from the Cave Story Plus version, but the song, yeah. You serious with this? DM Dokuro's version, on the other hand. Oh yes, much improved. Negatives? I guess not every track I heard hit the spot for me, but that's a pretty tall order for 30 plus tracks of music. And not to mention, the great tracks outweigh the missteps by a country mile. And even then, the, quote, missteps are still decent in their own way. I doubt I'll ever hear a better cover album for Cave Story ever again. This album is one of the rare instances of me wanting so badly for something to be canon. I want to hear these versions of the songs in the real game. And that's probably the best praise I could ever give a cover album. So, DM Dokuro, thumbs up. Major thumbs up. So, what does this mean? Is a bit of Bytes gonna be a regular thing now? Can we expect another video sometime soon? No. I mean, I would like to promise that, but my track record should tell you that it takes me a while. Now that said, now that I have a bunch of the assets updated, I might be able to make them easier, especially if I've got a good topic to work with. So, I mean, hey, if you've got a great idea for something that I should cover here, let me know down in the comments. And again, remember my question before about what your favorite cover albums are. And that's going to be important since there is so much music out there that deserves recognition. And with the strict rules that I put up for this little list here, a lot of great albums were cut. So let me know these things down in the comments. Thanks again for watching.